This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Whereby they're married off and they're working and I wouldn't imagine. I thought to myself, what was I doing at 9 years old? What was I doing when I was 10? I mean, far from the minds of anybody of my parents who raised me was it to even imagine that this girl would be in a working situation. But that's the reality for very many people today. And we're having that conversation this morning and we're looking into it. And even as we do, it might be sticky, but we'll do it anyway. Justice Nzioki Macau is judge of the Employment and Labour Relations Court. We're talking about safeguarding the future, justice against child labour. He's here with us this morning. Justice Macau, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming.
Asante sana.
Karibu sana. Well, we're going to ask you something to do something that you do every day. Interpretation. But this is of a proverb and not of evidence. But or the law rather. So Dennis is going to share that with you. We'd love to hear your thoughts around this proverb.
So today we are in Morocco, now a country in northwest of Africa, bordered by the Atlantic Ocean, Mediterranean Sea, Algeria, and the disputed territory of the Western Sahara. Now it's just 13 kilometers from Spain, and the country has both the Atlas Mountains, snowy peaks, and the Sahara Desert. As well, in 1777, it became the first country to recognize the United States as a country. Right? Let's go to the interpretation part of it, which is your daily cup of tea. Nothing lasts except goodness. How would you interpret that?
That when we do good, that is what will outlast us. That is what will outlive us, as opposed to evil. So when you do good, it lasts beyond your time. It lasts beyond you.
Well put, well said.
Absolutely.
Beautifully
That's what
done.
we remember you for, isn't it? For sure.
Yeah.
All right. Big issue. Child labor. Maybe we can get into a couple of definitions of what it is first before we even look into its eradication or protection of children in our societies. Child labor. What is it? What is this?
Child labor, by its own definition, is not necessarily wrong, because your children will have to pick up after themselves. They're supposed to clean up. They can make their beds. They can wash their dishes, their own undergarments. They can clean up around the house. That is permitted. What is wrong are the worst forms of child labor, which is what we are targeting to end. And this includes slavery, bondage, child prostitution, working in unsafe environments, because there are some instances where children actually do some work, but it should never be in an unsafe environment. So if there's ever a situation where a child is operating in an unsafe environment, then that is considered the worst form of child labor. And those are the things that are to be stopped.
So child labor is not, for a lot of people, the assumption could be, let's say somebody has a shop and you want to hire, quote unquote, a shop manager or even a house.
Right.
You have a house manager.
Right.
A lot of times people tend to go for the youthful ones.
Right.
And a lot of times you'll have those that are underage, don't have IDs. Is that a form of exploitation?
Yes, that is a form of exploitation, because you're putting that child out of the space they're entitled to be. A child is required to be given the best protection, which includes education, clothing, food, and housing. So if you take this child out of a situation where they're supposed to be in education and take them to work in a domestic house setting where there are house chores, it's not just I'm making my own bed kind of thing, then that is one of the worst forms of child labor, because it amounts to something close to servitude, because a person should be able to willingly enter into a contract of service. So as far as the UN is concerned and the ILO, a child is defined as anyone below 18. However, it's recognized that for certain instances, people who are aged 15 can either conscript, meaning to serve in regularly set up systems of engagement in war where the conscription age is 15, but you cannot have a child soldier, that is a child who's 8 years old, 7 years old, 10 years old, 14 years old. So there is a way in which there is a graduation from that which is acceptable to that which now is offensive. So having someone who's below the age of 18 working for you in your own house is a form of child labor, and it is deprecated.
So we talk about child labor in the country, and we know what the law says. The law is there and speaks to this very clearly.
Right.
But now there is the problem of enforcement of the law to ensure that the child gets the rights and that they are not exploited.
Right.
And we've always had conversations on when it comes to the implementation of the law and enforcement of this law is where there is a problem. So paint a picture of how bad the situation is and what remedy we have in ensuring that the law is actually implemented.
Right. In our country, thankfully, we've not had a lot of instances of child prostitution and child sexual exploitation, though there have been a few incidences reported at the coast. That is normally one of the worst forms of child labor. We've also not had children in conflict, armed conflict, like the child soldiers in a neighboring country. So those are normally some of the worst. In our case, where we seem to miss the bus is when we have children now being taken out of school to go and perform routine farm chores for a family, such as picking coffee, herding cattle, or taking care of the goats, as opposed to being in class. Because ideally, the best practice is to allow that child to get education, so that child is able to fend for themselves in future, and also to be a child. That's one of the things that a child is supposed to be, a child. So when you take them out and put them in that, then you mess up. Now, in our country, I have not, in the 14 years or so I've been a judge at the employment court, seen cases where children have been part of a process of exploitation that requires our intervention. I do know, however, that there are programs under the ILO, as well as various organizations who will be speaking to those interventions during our week of the symposium for the employment court, who will now indicate clearly the areas where there has been that exploitation. One of the areas I know is domestic help. And because it is by nature very private, it is only when the child comes out and says, I have been working for Nzioki for the last 2 years, I'm 17, then that's when now it gets to the knowledge of the authorities that there's a child who's been exploited in a particular instance, and then there's usually a place where they are given protection. I know of various organizations such as Credo and others in the country who have focused on issues around children, and they would probably be in a better place to state exactly where and how that has been done. I know that in factories, you cannot have a child working there. So if a labor inspector comes in and finds a child working, then that institution or that enterprise will definitely face consequences. There'll be accusations in court by way of a charge, and then there'll be a court case before the magistrate's court where convictions will ensue. So far, I have not heard of any cases that have filtered upwards. It's only in the labor sector where we've seen children being taken out of school to go and harvest coffee or tea, but most tea companies avoid such controversies given the ramifications and the international outcry that would be there if children are found picking coffee. So it's normally in small-scale domestic holdings where you will find some children not going to school so as to help pick the family tea or coffee. But for the companies that are registered, they wouldn't want the flack that would go with that.
Okay.
Yes.
You mentioned child bondage and slavery.
Right.
What is that?
This is where in some countries, thankfully that has not been the case here in Kenya, some places such as India where if Okari owes me a debt, I go to him and tell him, give me your child to work for me so as to pay that debt that you owe. And so he surrenders his child to me in bondage to pay off a debt. And normally that debt is never repaid because I'm getting cheap labor, free labor. Maybe I lent him 100 rupees or the equivalent of about 180 bob. And then I tell him, give me your child to work for me until you pay off that money. Usually it's amongst the poor in India where that happens. And that, unfortunately, has been one of the key drivers for the stoppage of this form of mistreatment of children. I do not know of any situations here in Kenya where that has ever happened, but yeah, that happens in the Asian countries in some instances.
I'm just curious. Why go for children? I'm thinking in terms of labor, the limitations to how much they can do and to what extent. Why would that happen? Why not go for somebody who's mature and take them
same.
bondage?
I would ask, why not just simply give a proposal on how to pay your debt? But unfortunately, in some countries, there's been a lackadaisical approach to protecting the rights of children. That has since become something of major focus, and it's one of the things that is constantly being fought in India. So if you think of it, it's the easier way out. There's this child. I want to exert my authority or influence over him. He owes me a debt. I tell him, if you can't pay, I need your child to come and work for me because I see easy, cheap labor. It's a mentality, it's a mindset, and that is where the problem is.
Wait a minute, I think I've just answered myself besides what you've just mentioned. I'm just thinking, if somebody came and told me, give me your child, I mean, the value I will hold to work so hard to repay you so that I can have my child back will be more than if, let's say, Aseta was my son, and I'll be like, Aseta, you can go. You go. you go. And fanya kazi. I will not, but if it's a child, there is something that emotionally bonds you and makes you then do something. My question is, because you mentioned some sectors, agriculture, coffee, you talked about tea. There are also some industries, informal industries, where child labor is particularly entrenched, not just locally, but globally. I'm just wondering, how does the law then address itself to questions of culture? For example, in terms of balancing culture, economic realities in some certain communities, for example, with these strict labor laws when child labor cases then come before courts?
One of the aims of the Convention Against the Worst Forms of Child Labor, which is something that came up in 1999, so you can see we are far removed from the Industrial Revolution. It's a question of a change in perspective. So culture is just perspective. How do we view something? How do we value something? So in the past, it seemed quite okay to have your children work for you, especially in the small cottage industries. I have, say, a gunpowder making enterprise in my house. My children get into it and they help me fabricate or put together. One, it is very hazardous, right? It is dangerous. Anything could happen. But they are my children. I'm the one who's making this, and because we culturally manufacture fireworks for celebrating our various holidays, then I have my children working for me. That is dangerous. That is against required principles in ensuring that you avoid children being in hazardous work environment. But because that was my culture, that we make fireworks, it's been done by my ancestors. I'm the 4th generation firecracker maker. Then we continue. But now to change that mindset to a place where you now consider the safety of the child first, as well as avoiding any harm that could come to that child by avoiding, by denying them education, by denying them the various protections a child is entitled to, under the rights to the child, which is under the UN Convention of 1989, then we have to change our thinking. We have to change how we approach it. So despite there being culture as the background to some of the worst forms of child labor, we have to stop at some point.
Right.
Yes.
You talk about, though, that you've not really, I mean, in the years that you've served as a judge in this court, you've not really come to, experience so much, or rather at least at the worst side of the spectrum, a lot of these cases. So very few occurrences, one would assume. If that's the case, why is there then a push for the end to it if we're not seeing so much of it happening in Kenya?
It's because it exists. And like I said, part of the problem is the secret nature of some of these kinds of things. Because until the police crack prostitution ring, until the police discover some child pornography somewhere on a site or on a hard drive, until the child comes forward and says, I've been working at this home, I'm underage, I've been exploited, I'm not paid, they deny me food, they deny me sleep. Until that comes forward, you do not know about it. And so we need to fight it, despite the fact that we don't see much of it, even in our situation. But it's because it exists. And because it's a global thing and it involves even trafficking of children, the sale of children, which is something that we actually do have here in Kenya, then we need to work hard to eliminate all forms of child labor. And one of the things that you'll notice with the sale of children is that these children are normally trafficked for a purpose, to either go and work or to go and be misused or abused. So it is not that it doesn't always appear. It's there at times underlying, and it's until we discover it that we know there is a problem and that we need to do something about it.
You know, when you talk about it, now thinking of what we see every day, I don't know if that would be categorized as child labor, but you go to our streets today and you find children, instead of being in schools, they're out here hawking and begging. And this would most of the time happen with an adult seated somewhere monitoring what it is they are doing. And you just stop a child and ask them, "Mama, yuko wapi?" And you insist on that. They would point to where the parent is, and you look at that, and it is something you're seeing every day in front of the authorities. Is that, first of all, child labor? And how do we deal with that? Because that also borders on poverty that people experience in the country. And they say they have to work for us to be able to eat, for them to go to school. They have to assist me, and begging and hawking is one of the ways.
It is child labor, and it is one of the worst forms of child labor because, one, you are denying that child education, you are denying them the comforts a child is entitled to, you are exposing them to harmful work. This child is operating between cars, people, and some of the children are minors, they are underage. So when you have children who are being told to go and beg so that the family can be fed, that is actually exploitation of a child. It's exploitation of a minor. Sadly, as you've pointed out, it happens right in front of our eyes sometimes, and not much is done. But that needs to stop. Something has to be done.
From a judicial perspective, just borrowing from what I said, because I had that in mind, and I'm thinking, you look at the families that are on the streets, you look at some of these women who are hawking, using children, like I said, rightly put. I mean, poverty is always cited as a major factor in a lot of these things. From a judicial perspective, at what point do you then reconcile justice and compassion and say, look, okay, in a case like this, it is wrong, but you have compassion? Does it happen?
We are supposed to temper justice with mercy. But when an adult does something deliberately knowing it's wrong, harming a child, I think there's room for you not to have so much mercy for that adult. Think about it this way. We as adults now know better. So we are supposed to do better. If it was in an age where we were ignorant, we had no clue what the right thing was, meaning hundreds of years ago when we were still in our basic rudimentary lifestyles, I would understand when we didn't understand. But now we have all this technology to help us appreciate. We have all this learning. We have all this experience to look back on. So why would I send out my child to go and beg? And I'm an able-bodied human being, capable of working, capable of earning, but I refuse. I look for the easiest way out. Remember that example we gave about that labor that I forced someone else to give me that child to work for me, to pay a debt, instead of that person actually being the one to come and work for me to pay that debt. It is just wrong on all accounts, and sadly, we can't have an excuse for it. So, no, I wouldn't want to see mercy in that case.
When we look at issues like this that cut across, and we look at jurisdictions where we have some serious cases of things like this, do nations look at their problem as their own issues, or do these issues cut across jurisdictions? Because I think about the African continent and I think about times of conflict in different countries and child soldiers. One of my very good friends today is a former child soldier from one of the West African nations.
Right.
And the horrors of what they had to go through, unrealizing of what the horror was until they were much older.
True.
Because they were on drugs
most of the time.
And they were told that they had to do this because they would die.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they would be killed.
They're threatened.
Right. You know. And this happened to thousands of children, mostly boys in conflict areas, very rarely girls.
Right.
But it happened to them. And also then when we look at, again, slavery, bondage, for sexual exploitation, maybe not as much in Kenya as it does in other African countries, to a very large and high degree percentage.
Right.
Do efforts that have been taken to eliminate or to even have the conversation about these things that are happening spread beyond the boundaries of Kenya for people to come together in concert and say, guys, let's have a look at this thing?
Yes, it does. Every country that has signed the UN Declaration on the Convention and Rights of the Child has to have a report. Secondly, under the Convention number 182, which is the elimination of the worst forms of child labor, each country is required to give a report. And every country has an obligation. In the event there is, say, for instance, we are a conduit country, meaning children are being trafficked through our nation from Ethiopia, Eritrea, any other country, South Sudan, to other countries in the region. We have an obligation to make a report to the UN and the International Labour Organization that this is happening in our region, and we suspect that 3 times we've caught trucks carrying minors, that they're being trafficked to this country for a certain purpose. And that other country, we'd have to also make a report to indicate what they're doing to mitigate against those offenses. You realize that in some countries, because of conflict, there's already that question mark, because you're seeing child soldiers or their combatants who are definitely looking underage. That problem may spill over into the neighboring countries. For instance, in some countries to the central part of Africa, I don't want to name names, where children fight, and then when they retreat into a neighboring country where they are given either comfort or solace. And then the next time they're sent out on a mission, they're dragged, like you're saying, sent out to go and kill, murder, loot in another area, which is outside that country. And then ultimately, what is our responsibility as the world, we have to step in where we know that there is child labor, where there is exploitation, and especially where there is the use of children in conflict, either for war or even for sexual exploitation.
Okay.
We must step in. Okay. That's our human, it's something we must do as human beings.
I have a question in terms of when making judgments for child labor offenders, whether this is an employee, a parent, an institution, or whoever it is. What are those penalties like? Like in sentencing, years, whatever?
Sadly,
standard?
Yeah, sadly, I wouldn't be able to tell you the particular sentencing guidelines that would be there because I don't handle criminal aspects of child labor. The cases that would come to me would be in relation to a conflict either between the employee and the employer, meaning the laborer, who is a minor, against the employer. If that does come to me, then I would assess it just the same way I would assess any other claim. And once it's established there was exploitation, then there would be a punishment in terms of damages that would be payable to that child. But in addition, I could refer the matter to the magistrate's court for a trial of the person who is alleged or has been shown to have exploited this child or used the child to work for them contrary to the law. Because I am in the civil side of things, I cannot deal with some of those criminal aspects, but I would be able to refer. I know for anything affecting a child, it is viewed with very, very, very serious connotations because I, as an adult, I have a mind which I can make up, I can decide, I can do things. But if it is against a child is, first of all, not capable of making informed consent. A child is not capable of making rational choices. So if I exploit a child, it is worse for me as an offender as opposed to if I conned you out of, say, some money or something. Yeah. So when it comes to a child, it's viewed in a more serious manner.
You know, most of the time, whenever such cases, even if you're just having a conversation with another adult, one of the comfort areas that people retreat to is, I was not aware. You know, sikukuwa najua. This is my child and I was only trying to help. Or this is my sister's child, I was only trying to help because back where she comes from, they are not able to, so I was just stepping in. Can that ever be used in a court of law as, I was not aware, please have mercy on me?
No. Ignorance is no defense. Ignorance of the law is no defense. It matters not that you are aware. You will be charged and then you will face a consequence. One of the things that I like about listening to people who try and articulate that I was not aware, you ask just a simple question. How old is this child? Or how old is this person? They say 10, 12. So how can you say you are not aware that it is improper to employ them to do this kind of work? How would you say you are not aware? You yourself, you're an adult. I believe at the basic, you would know that it is wrong for you to employ a child to dig a pit latrine for you. It is wrong for you to employ a child to fabricate fireworks for you. Just because they have deft and small fingers to be able to roll the cracker into a nice, tiny roll doesn't mean that it is right, right?
So that brings us to the next, the follow-up question to that in terms of, with the laws that do exist, there is need for advocacy and awareness so that people know what the law says and how to go about it. That even in the event where poverty is there are ways that one can canvass it through the leadership, representatives, NGOs, to ensure that this child receives the very best. So then, what are we doing, or what should we do to ensure that this information on child labor, labor laws, everyone understands, so that no one ever comes to court to say,
I did
wasn't
not know.
aware."
One of the things we're actually trying to achieve through our symposium, which will be on the 15th of this month, is to bring people to the table. Children who've been exploited, survivors of child labor, they'll be there to talk about their experiences and how they got out of it. There'll be organizations that handle children, that deal with these problems. They'll be there on the round tables. There'll be academia, people who actually now go and research and study this phenomena. There'll be lawyers. There'll be judges, the court. There'll be magistrates who will be there. And there'll be members of the public who will be present, so that we can have this conversation about child labor and the worst forms of child labor, so that we're able to, 1, identify them, 2, prevent, and 3, do better as we go forward as a country and as a people.
There was a time in China, sorry, there's a time in China, because we made reference to India and what other countries are doing. There was a time there was a conversation about digital child labor. And in China, there was an investigation that was done on a particular company, I'll not mention the name. And what was revealed is that school children were found working in a factory. And they were working on devices that you and I will use on a normal day-to-day living.
Right.
And there were issues of working overtime, night shifts, poor working conditions, violations of a lot of laws.
Right.
Is this a current problem now that we're looking at technology and where the future of technology, AI, conversations, that you're not necessarily going to find children in a coffee plantation,
but behind a screen,
but
somewhere.
behind a computer, behind a laptop, working on something, fixing some gadgets.
Right.
Is that a conversation?
Yes, indeed. That is part of what we are going to discuss. One of our pre-conference activities was to bring out some of these activities, and we are trying to deal with the technological advancements that have come, which are also affecting the way we work and how children can be exploited. Because like you have said, children can now be deployed to do work online. They can be deployed to do work on gadgets that you and I will use. They can be deployed to do things that are technologically enabled or assisted. Sadly, because of technological advancement, this is a new frontier, an attack on the rights of a child coming now from even the technological side. And so, yes, we will have that conversation. We will have a roundtable where we will discuss AI, we'll discuss technology and its impact on the worst forms of child labor and how we can try and mitigate against exploitation of children using technology.
How do you navigate the waters between what would be child labor and then a necessity for certain things to happen, whether that's from an economic point of view or whether from a cultural point of view? And allow me to give examples of both.
Right.
Again, we still live quasi-traditionally, especially as Africans, and that there is the expectation that work will be done by children. The reason why a lot of people in the traditional setting had many children was not because they were necessarily fertile, but because they had swathes of land, and that the people to till the land essentially later would be their children. And because they would not afford payments to external parties to take care of that. Now, when we come into what would be more modern times, some of that backlog or the dregs of that traditional setting still exist in our minds today. So that's one side. Traditional, cultural. The other side is economics of things. In today's world, there are very many children, Justice, you may not know, or you may know, probably do know, who operate in a space on their own because their parents or their parent or their caregiver must be away eking out a living. So these children wake alone, they prepare a meal alone, they come back and do chores in the house alone, they prepare another meal alone, wash whatever needs to be washed, and then prepare to go to bed alone before their parents or caregivers come back and they're asleep again. Would this be classified as child labor? Many would give the reasoning that I don't have a choice. I can't be here at this time. And I've raised this child to then be able to understand that they can do these things for themselves.
Wow, that's quite a tough one. The balance between tradition, family, life, and that nuanced abandonment of children. Well, you know, economics has always played a role in the exploitation of children, be it for selfish personal gain, where I'm exploiting a child, making them work for me so that I can earn some money, or in a circumstance where this child is being denied the opportunity to be a child by the circumstances I have placed the child in. Whereas a child making and preparing a meal for themselves is something that is not necessarily evil, or a child putting themselves to sleep, that's a form of independence. It may not be evil.
At 6 or 7.
But the child being alone for a considerable period, unsupervised by any adult, because the parent went to work very early in the morning, and the parent comes in after the child has gone to sleep, that would suggest or connote to me that the child has been abandoned. Because who takes care of the child in all that period? How can you expect a 7-year-old or a 6-year-old to take care of themselves just because you've trained them to light the stove, to crack an egg and cook a meal for themselves, or even operate a microwave? I don't think that that's right, because ultimately what you're doing is that you're denying that child the best forms of being a child, which is that you're not giving them a chance to be a child. They're not playing. They're not out there doing things. They're not watching you model for them behavior that they will now rely on later in life to navigate the challenges in life. So if a parent has to be away that long from their child, then a question arises as to the welfare and the well-being of that child.
What if they can't afford it? Would that be a defense? There's a defense. We say ignorance is not a form of defense, but in this case, is affordability one? I can't afford for somebody to take care of this child. Neither can I afford for them to be in a space whereby, it would be different. Is that a form of defense?
It's not exactly a defense, but it would be something that would be for pause, because if I can't afford to take care of this child, then why did I have this child? That's the question I'd ask at the back of my mind. And as a parent, what is your intention? How do you intend to impact this life? Are you making this child live a better life than what you're having? Or are you just bringing this child into the same misery that you're in, where you work like a slave? I mean, if you're away before the child wakes up and you're back after the child is asleep, and you don't even get time with that child, then what is the end game? What is the plan?
Justice, when we have such conversations in what Ndu has described, is a question of child protection services now walking in to ensure, because at the end of the day, what you're looking at is what is best for the child. So in such instances, in other jurisdictions, you'd see the child taken from the mother and paired perhaps with the family that can give the child can't give the child the best there is.
Yes.
Does that happen in Kenya? And if that's the case, are people aware that these are options that are there? And how do we have such difficult conversations with the child, even when pairing them with a parent that is not theirs?
Well, in Kenya, we don't have a well-defined system of child welfare, but there's a department which is concerned about child welfare and operates from Nyayo House, where neglect is brought to the attention of the authorities, then the authorities can step in. In our case, the children will be taken from you as a parent and put in a children's home, which in my mind is not the ideal situation, because it would be best if that child were placed in a family setting and not a children's home. But that does sometimes happen. Sadly, the abandonment that Ndu talked about, where a child is left on their own, is a sad reality. You could blame the economic times and hardships. You could blame culture, because as Ndu and all of us will remember, in the old setting, a child did not belong to an individual. It was communal. That child belonged to the society.
Yeah.
And we all would come in together to support, help, raise, and protect that child. And that, unfortunately, we have lost due to either rural-urban migration or the loss of values in our culture. So much that we have these issues now cropping up.
I think as a follow-up to what Seto was asked, I'm just thinking, we've covered stories where, for example, in Migori County, children as young as 8, 9, 10, or 12, you see videos of them descending in these deep tunnels in search of gold, you know. The tunnels look dangerous and could collapse. And we've had incidents where there's been collapse and loss of life. You look at that kind of scenario, and it's in the open again, like the example of just here in Nairobi, you'll see children hawking and all that. Talk about enforcement, because you are on one end of the justice system, but there's a process before this gets to you. It has to start somewhere.
Right.
How would you measure enforcement at the moment with all these examples that you're talking about?
Yes.
We need to do better?
Yeah, we must do better. It's not good. Exposing a child to harmful work like that of mining, it's dangerous, it's hazardous, and that is categorized as the worst form of child labor. We know it is there, but sadly, it is not the work of a judge to enforce that law by going to arrest. It is someone else who has to investigate, arrest, and bring forward those issues to a forum, which would be a magistrate's court, where now they can be articulated and something done. I don't think we're doing enough as a country to protect children. And I know I'll ruffle a few feathers by saying so, but it's a fact. I don't think we're doing enough. We need to do more. I don't know the percentage in terms of how well we're doing, but that's definitely not on. So if we allow children to be exploited, it doesn't matter whether it's for economic gain, whether it's for sexual exploitation. If we allow it, then we are failing the children.